I'm very happy to welcome you all tonight to the first event in this year's Creative Writing Reading Series. My name is Sandy Meek, and I coordinate our creative writing program and teach creative writing poetry here. This year, the creative writing program is celebrating the Year of the Alum. We'll be welcoming alumni back to campus throughout the year for a variety of events. At each reading in this year's series, a Berry alum will introduce the visiting writer. And it's my honor tonight to introduce to you our first returning alumnus, Alex Quinlan, Berry class of 2005. Alex Quinlan's poetry has appeared in the Beloit Poetry Journal and elsewhere, and can be found in the current issue of the Tampa Review. He has received prizes from the AWP Intro Journals Project and the Academy of American Poets, among others. An essay on the poet Charles Simic appears in a recent edition of the Dictionary of Literary Biography, and an interview with the poet David Kirby is forthcoming in Birmingham Poetry Review. He has been editor-in-chief of the Southeast Review, as well as a contributing editor at Tusculum Review. And once, upon a very, very long time ago, he was the editor of Berry's own literary magazine, Ramifications. His reviews have appeared in the Southeast Review and Scout Poetry and Review. He is a lecturer in the Department of English at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where he teaches courses in creative writing and literature. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, Alex received a BA with honors in English and philosophy at Berry College, an MFA in poetry from Washington University in St. Louis, where following graduation he was the third-year fellow in poetry, and a PhD in English with a focus in poetry and cultural studies from Florida State University, where he was given the Ruth and Bertram Davis Award for Outstanding Graduate Student Career. He has previously been a visiting professor at both Florida State University and Berry College. Just last month, after 6 years away, he and his wife, writer and professor Catherine Meeks, returned with their two beautiful young sons, Galway 2 and Virgil, 9 months, to Chattanooga, Tennessee. When asked about his current feelings about Berry, 14 years post-graduation, this is what Alex wrote. I have profound gratitude for Berry College as an institution, and particularly the Department of English, Reading, and Writing, which has provided me with so many opportunities for intellectual, creative, and professional development across the years. Looking back on my time as a student, I treasure the gift of space, both literal and figurative, Berry provided me to pursue my passions where they led me. Berry's stunning campus, as sprawling as it is full of wonders, provided me a sense of remove from the city, Memphis, Tennessee, where I grew up, a city whose history looms in my memory, as well as in a troubled region of the American cultural imagination, a city I never understood, a city I am still striving to understand. Though the enchanting remove of Berry's bucolic setting and stunning architecture are noteworthy, places are made special, not by buildings and trees, but by people. That is what I most value about Berry, the dedicated, hardworking, kind, brilliant people who opened up, for me and so many others, the space for intellectual growth and the opportunity to pursue creative endeavors that I would never have otherwise undertaken. Mike Mejia, Doctors Tina Bucher, Michael Papazian, Michael Cooley, Jim Watkins, hell, even Peter Lawler. All of them made lasting impressions on me, not simply as a student of philosophy or literature, or even as a writer and professor I've become in my professional life, but as a person. They, and so many others at Berry, have shaped me, not just for good, but for the better. The greatest debt of gratitude I owe, however, is to the person standing before you reading these words, Dr. Sandra Meek, who gave me permission to become the person and the poet I dreamed of being, and whose dedication and resolute vision in the practice of the art of poetry showed me, and continues to show me, to show all of us how to get there. Okay, I swear to you I didn't add that part. Alex, the honor is all ours. We are grateful and so proud. And to you all, the Berry community and friends, it is my further honor to say now, please welcome back Dr. Alex Quinlan.
It's great to be back here, y'all. It's funny because, Sandy and I were making some of these preparations over Facebook and sending messages back and forth, and I sent that thing I wrote, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying that she responded back and saying, oh gosh, thanks so much, these are such kind words, I'm going to have to really practice so I don't cry when I get up here and read it. And of course, as soon as I saw her behind the microphone, I started tearing up, and I'm sure you can see me now, I'm just a hot mess. So, you dodged the bullet, Sandy, I guess, but it hit me. So anyway, I'm happy to take it. So yeah, pardon my disheveled state here as I come to introduce Nick Norwood. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight in the Berry Science Auditorium. This is a place where I have many fond memories of doing just this, right? Just sitting in the audience and listening to some beautiful poetry being read. And so it's such an honor to share this beautiful space with you all, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Nick read his transporting poems as soon as I shuffle off the stage here. I know Nick's work mostly through his most recent book, Eagle and Phoenix. And as a book, Eagle and Phoenix does important work. Taken individually, these poems are astute, even cunning. Streams of free verse flow by in the little boulder-like shapes of sonnets, and a poem in heroic couplets, of all things, stands like a plinth amid a forest of quatrains, and all of it is well-turned and lovely. Taken together, though, the poems in Nick Norwood's collection, his most recent one, are much more than well-turned and lovely. They articulate a powerful vision. Sometimes one encounters books of poems that seem to be nothing more than the shapeless accumulation of a few years' worth of writing. In Eagle and Phoenix, on the other hand, the reader encounters a meticulously arranged sequence of poems that builds momentum as it progresses. Perhaps I should say it's a sequence of sequences, since the book is arranged in 4 sections, reminiscent of the structure of a classical symphony, say. Yet, in terms of thematic development, the architecture of the collection progresses through a series of concentric circles that might be more aptly described as Dantean, except they aren't the circles of hell, but rather circles of his own experience that Nick Norwood explores. The opening section of the book is comprised of a series of poems depicting childhood scenes. Together they compose an origin story of sorts. From the opening poem, Dad dead, Mom started dressing in cute skirts, and she and her single friends would leave me to step out, just 27, 28 years old, looking pretty and having the time of her life. The second section, or movement, of the collection expands from the realm of personal experience to the realm of family. It begins with an ode to small families, and then proceeds to sift through the scattered pieces of the speaker's own family in an endeavor to quilt them into something whole. The section spans 5 generations. It progresses from elegies to the speaker's great-grandparents and ends with a pair of odes to his own adult children. The third movement of the collection expands again to the broader experience of life in community. It is in this section that the personal and interpersonal conflicts and tensions explored in the first half of the book become more noticeably entwined with larger issues of culture and politics. Like most of the poems in the collection, they depict rural life in the American South. One of the most poignant moments in the collection is the ekphrastic poem, The Names, which emerges from a description of the 1934 voter registry of Columbus, Georgia, the city where Norwood lives and teaches, to focus attention on issues of political representation and racial oppression that haunt Columbus, Georgia, the South, and this nation to this day. The fourth and final movement of the collection synthesizes the elements of personal experience, family, and community through an exploration of history and place. It begins in contemplation of the Eagle and Phoenix Mills and the dam with the same name nearby, their history and connection to the legacy of the Civil War, and it ends with a pair of poems, Phoenix City Story, a third-person narrative set in the same place, but our own time, and Christmas in Columbus, Georgia, where the poet-speaker again emerges, this time in a diner where he observes that the black couple in the corner's got a kid, 6 or 8, who mistakes an aging grease monkey in the next booth with a white beard for Santa Claus. The speaker occupies the position the poet often occupies, on the scene but out of the action, an observer who feels for and feels for the other patrons in the diner, who participates in the experiences of others through an act of compassionate attention, then ends up in the place where we should all be once we've seen the way our own personal worlds, small though they may be, are not self-contained, but rather that they ripple ever outward, shaping the lives of others and touching history. Off to the workshop to cook up something about peace, love, and goodwill. Nick Norwood is the author of the poetry collections Gravel and Hawk, winner of the Hollis Summers Prize in Poetry, A Palace for the Heart, and The Soft Blair, as well as the limited edition books Text and Wrestle, produced in collaboration with the artist and master printer Erica Adams. His poems have appeared, get ready for it, it's a long list, widely in places such as the Paris Review, Southwest Review, Western Humanities Review, Southwestern American Literature, Shenandoah, Poetry Daily, New Ohio Review, 5 Points, the Oxford American, the Greensboro Review, U.S. Poet Laureate Ted Kuzer's syndicated column American Life and Poetry, on the PBS NewsHour site Artbeat, on NPR's Writer's Almanac, and elsewhere. His honors include a Pushcart Prize, an International Merit Poetry Award in Poetry from Atlanta Review, a residency at the Gentile Foundation in Wyoming, both a Tennessee Williams Scholarship and a Walter E. Dakin Fellowship from the Sewanee Writers Conference. He's also published a number of essays, reviews, book chapters, and critical studies of poetry. He teaches creative writing at Columbus State University and directs the Carson McCullers Center for Writers and Musicians in Columbus, Georgia, and Nyack, New York. Please join me in welcoming Nick Norwood.
I'm going to try to go without the mic. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Alex. Thank you, Sandy, so much for having me, and thank you guys for all coming. I'm really happy to be here. I got fed supper even too. There was sushi. They didn't tell me that before I came, so it's all good. But in our dinner conversation, it made me decide to start with some poems I hadn't planned to read. Because we were talking about, as writers, how it's often the case that you're struggling with something and it's not going well, but because maybe if you're like me, you're just stubborn, so you just keep going, or maybe you just want it so bad that you can't stop, and that piece never really comes to much. But while you're doing that, some other thing just pops up, and it turns out that the thing that just pops up, that's the good one, right? It's often the case. So here's something that popped up while I was working on another poem. And this is when my son is now adult age. I don't want you to know how old he is. Anyway, when he was 6 months old, he was a a very good child, and sometimes I would be involved doing things when I was supposed to be parenting, and then I would look up, and he was one of those kids, he was always doing exactly what you would want him to do, except on this particular day. And this is what the poem's about. And I'll just say it mentions a really famous Russian novel, which I'll just remind you, involves 4 brothers, and one of them kills their father in a very bloody way. And his brothers were pleased about this because he's such a jerk. So anyway, it's called More Reading Habits. His son has become a great lover of books and is just now tearing through his first novel, The Brothers Karamazov. He's 6 months old, a prodigy in diapers seated on the floor, ripping along page after page. He curls the deconstructed fragments in his fingers, waves them overhead to see how they fly, then sticks them in his mouth, chews, savoring the complex flavors that survive his translation. Pausing, reflective, he decides for himself whether to swallow the story or to spit it out. He's already a connoisseur, a shrewd post-structuralist who's founding his own school. While there at the table is Pops, Daddy, old blood and guts, heaped over his platter, trying to decide what happens to the father in his tale, the buffoon who gets what he deserves. So, and here's the thing, actually, that I was working on at the time, which I'll just go ahead and read to you. Anyway, I won't say anything more about it than that, except it was based on something in the news at the time. This was some years ago. But I think the news is still going on in our time. And the poem is called For the Drowned. It says, first, the river unclothes them, washes toward the Gulf their t-shirts and tennis shoes, their torn khakis and simple house dresses, and even eventually the finer points of their faces, the identifying features, so that often they seem to arrive incomplete, like lumps of clay not yet fully formed, flesh unpronounceable. Arturo says it's fish, mudcats and alligator gars that take what's missing. They'll eat anything, he says, and I imagine as much with each rising bubble in the draft. We find 10 or 12 a year, and all of them aliens, illegals, wetbacks, or so it goes in the reports. Who knows? Who can tell by looking? Here in the valley, our tongues are already swollen with 2 languages. The contents of our stomachs is the same, and most of us are too poor for dentists. But it makes life less complicated for the coroner. The county's reserved a special place for them in the graveyard. He applies the tags. Arturo and I backhoe the graves out of dirt too thin for planting, inter the bodies, reclothed, faceless, in white bags. I've been thinking a lot lately about my relationship with poetry. I had to give a talk recently to the Rainey McCullers School of the Arts. I'm very proud of that name. I'm the director of the Carson McCullers Center for Writers and Musicians, so that they have their new School of the Arts partly named after Carson McCullers, and Rainey as in Ma Rainey. Anybody know who Ma Rainey is? Congratulations. She's from Columbus, Georgia, so I thought that was pretty cool. Rainey McCullers. And I gave a talk to them, and I'm talking to some young people, and I'm being presented to them as a poet, which is kind of embarrassing, isn't it? It's like on the one, oh, he's a poet, you know, or oh, he's a poet, you know, either way. So I was talking to them about my relationship to poetry and thinking about it, how this came to happen to me, you know, and I remember things that happened to me when I was in school. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves, ate the fellow raw. It's the opening stanza of a poem by Emily Dickinson. You guys know that? We read that when I was in school. And of course, as like a 9-year-old, I was like, ate the fellow raw, cool. And it's not like I went, oh, I love poetry now. But that stuck with me. And of course, there were other ones. I bet you guys know this one's Two Roads Diverged in a Yellow Wood. Sorry, I could not draw it. I love it. I bought a card for someone recently that said, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one that smelled like pizza. And I mean, it stuck with me, that poem, and some other ones like that. And again, it wasn't that I felt, oh, I love poetry, but I think slowly something was happening to me with respect to poetry. And then when I was in high school, I'll never forget, we read this poem that I bet a lot of you also know, by Edwin Arlington Robinson. It's a poem called Richard Cory. And I'll never forget this. I think I was in the 9th grade when we read this poem. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said good morning, and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked, and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And one calm summer night, Richard Cory went home and put a bullet in his head. You know, that was kind of a stunner, don't you think, that last line? I know when I was in the 9th grade, I thought it was pretty stunning. There's such a mystery in it, right? We're not told why he put a bullet through his head. We have to think about it. And we can't know for sure, but I think that's one of the best things about the poem, right? But also, another thing that it did to me was I think it made me realize that a poem could be something completely different than what I had imagined. And again, it wasn't like at that point I went, oh, I love poetry. But I had a different understanding of it. Yeah, and then you go on and you find these poems that make you want to keep going. That are the things that make you want to write poems. To me, that's what it's all about. Why do you do this? Is it because you have something to say? That sounds so grand. I don't know. It's not why I'm here. You know? It's because I've read poems and I love them so much that I thought I want to do that. It's like a poem that has meant a lot to me in the last, working on these last 2 books. It's a poem by Robert Hayden. This poet, one of the famous African-American poets of the 20th century. He's got some great poems. Great poem on Frederick Douglass. A great poem on getting a whipping, called The Whipping. Check it out. But his most famous poem by far is this poem called Those Winter Sundays. It goes, Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked them. I'd wake to hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Yeah, I just think, right there, he's done it. Because we've all been that little shit, haven't we? Thanks to their fathers, the stupidest man on the planet. Here's one of my own that I was talking earlier also about. You were asking me, now I came to be writing about place, and it's a long story, I won't go into it, but I will say that one of the things we do at Columbus State, which you also do here, is that you're part of the Georgia Poetry Circuit. And this allows us to bring to our campuses 3 times a year nationally known poets. And it allows us to also have conversations with those poets. And we brought Arthur Z some years ago. 10 years ago, maybe? Was that long ago? Longer ago than that? Wow. And it was after I published my first 2 books and I was sort of searching for my new direction. And Arthur Z and I had a conversation, and he did one of those things where he said something at a given time, right, that totally changed things for me. He probably doesn't realize it to this day. Doesn't care. But he said poems should have pressure behind them. And he meant by that the poet, they have to be something really important to the poet. Right? Not just how clever the poet can be, or hey, here's an idea, I'll write a poem on this. Right? But that the poet ought to be writing poems that really mean something to the poet. Yeah. The next day I drafted this poem called AM. AM is in morning, as in AM PM, and AM is in radio, as in AM FM. Because when I was growing up in Texas in the 60s, all the music we wanted to listen to was on AM radio. And my father was a country man, so we listened to AM radio in the morning on a radio that looked just like the one they had on Gilligan's Island. Remember the magic radio? My father's shaving with the radio on. He's in the bathroom. The true tones in the kitchen. All of us crammed in this cracker box on Spicer Street, Wichita Falls. The one tiny speaker strains and crackles. The air fattens on Patsy Cline. Ernest Tubb comes on and it starts to wobble. Daddy's dark face, mirrored back a foot away, half shrouded in a cloud of barbasol, cuts through a cirrus of steam. In t-shirt and boxers, he's like a linebacker in a phone booth. But his voice, when he arcs out a Bob Wills holler, starts near the ceiling and doesn't level off till he gets Oklahoma. In 6 months, he'll be dead. His oil field Cessna accordioned into the flats near Alney. But right now he's happy. Almost completely himself. A half-assed country singer. Playing to a packed house. Yeah, there's a lot of poems in this book, Rattle and Hawk, about 1969, which, man, I can't believe it's like the 50th anniversary of things that happened in 1960. It's pretty shocking. Things that happened in my life. My father was killed in November 1969. It was the 50th anniversary of the first moonwalk. And I was 7 years old when that happened. It was the 50th anniversary of my first record. I've become a vinyl hound these days. I know you guys have gone back to this, the vinyl thing. Beware. I now have 1,500 albums in my 764 square foot house. So, but probably the most important LP in my life was the first one I ever got. So it's a poem about that, my first record. It's Johnny Cash at San Quentin. The second he recorded in a state pen, and the whole damn place goes wild when he sings this song he wrote about this very prison just the night before. So straight off, Johnny sings it for them again. But a boy named Sue is the reason at 7 I jones for it so bad I beg. The mud and the blood and the beer, the line that something in my lawless heart so longs to hear repeatedly. I stamp, cry, pitch a fit when Mama says no way she'll waste money on it and makes me lug it back to the record aisle of Monkey Ward's. The late August heat is murderous. We're here shopping for school clothes. My oily fingertips slur against the cellophane wrapper as I set it back in the rack and slouch away. Resigned, never guessing how at Christmas, a month after Daddy's been killed in the oil field, I'll get a gift-wrapped copy under the tree. Having already forgotten how much I'd wanted it, I get carried away all over again by the boom chicka boom. Chained to the console of a second-hand RCA Daddy bought before he died. I start listening closer to the lyrics of my favorite song. How the speaker's daddy named him Sue to make him strong. He knew he wouldn't be around to help raise his son, we understand. He just wasn't that kind of a man. It's my favorite line. I see now its pretty thin glue holding this song together, stretching across its enormous gaps in logic. But I don't really care. I just want Johnny's voice, that resonant bass baritone with a rich Arkansas finish. Like the voice of God the Father, it seems to my ears. And like nothing I ever heard inside a church, or anything I'll ever hear again inside our little rent house, except when I spin this record over and over and over. Yeah, 50th anniversary of the first memoir. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? How many people don't think it really happened? You want to tell? No, never. That's too embarrassing. Embarrassing, right? But it is amazing because not only did they do it so they would have a school, we got to watch it live. It's pretty astonishing when you think about that. How did they do that, right? And it was a big deal. And I remember as a 7-year-old, what we thought was going to be the future. I mean, I don't think your ordinary person could have imagined a time when everybody was going to be flying around in cyberspace. But the average person thought in 1969 we were going to be flying around in actual space. You know, I remember people saying, oh, you'll be taking dates to the moon. Yeah, sure. So it hasn't actually happened that way. My father was killed in the oil fields flying a Cessna with the most primitive methods of flying that were available. VFR, visual flight reference, meaning that you're literally navigating by looking at landmarks on the ground. You don't have an instrument rating, as they say, right? And on the day that it happened, he was painting our house as a deal to with our landlords so we wouldn't have to pay the rent that month, right? And he was actually scraping the paint on the outside of the house. And he made me sit in front of the television and watch until they were going to walk on the moon and run out and tell him, hey, come daddy, it's time, right? So this is what the poem's about, moonwalk. Oh, by the way, do you guys know what the name of the lunar module was? Eagle. Does anyone know, surely you know this, because all kids in Texas should know this, what the first word spoken from the surface of the moon was? Houston. Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. Much more poetic than the one step for man. Anyway, moonwalk. The Eagle landed, squats on its lunar base. I'm stationed at the RCA. My father, this waning July Sunday, is up a ladder. He's scraping paint. The snarl reverberates, a sort of rhythmic growl like gravel and hawk. Meanwhile, car ads, experts, David Brinkley passes the time, and when the moment comes, I run outside and back. My father strides in behind, dusting hands on paint-flecked jeans. Tomorrow, VFR in his oil field Cessna, he'll fly pipeline checking for leaks. His ground support, the course of rivers, highways, spaceship water towers rising over one-story towns. The sun coming up over Texas hardpan will go to work on its bristle of pump jacks and derricks. Like skeletal robots, they'll cast their shadows across mesquite, concrete, caliche, stubble. For now, we focus on the blue-gray light, the crackling sound. They climb out and down, one the other, dainty, unpracticed, like two dull, ham-fisted men in a knick-knack store. They even seem to speak with a hop-step cadence. Or is it just a distance? I watch, transfixed. The live feed howls. The window unit hums its blue-gray note. And after a while, my dad gets up, goes out, back to his graveling hawk. I am working on this book now since I published Gravel and Hawk. It's called Eagle and Phoenix. So called because I moved into a 19th century cotton mill called the Eagle and Phoenix. That spelling, that is the spelling in southwest Georgia of the word Phoenix, in case you think that we make a typo. They don't go for the O there in southwest Phoenix, or they didn't in the 19th century. And I just thought that was a cool title, Eagle and Phoenix. That'd be a great title for a book of poems. And so then I started writing all these poems about mill culture, about my own family's working life and being cotton farmers and that sort of thing. And then I also wrote a lot about eagles and phoenixes. Like you guys, we have actual eagles in Columbus, Georgia now. Although they actually nest in Alabama. I don't know what to make of that. But we're right across the river. They choose to nest on that side. Pretty good. Yes, someone from Alabama right here. It's my book designer right here, y'all, Justin Briley. So I tell everyone my mom loves the cover. Nah. But anyway, it was fun to write about eagles and to do a lot of research, field research, going out and watching the eagles come into the nest and that sort of thing. But it also made me remember, hey, the name of the lunar module is Eagle, the first lunar module. So all right, since we're in the science building, here's another science trivia question for you. What happened to the first lunar module? Right, tell. It is still there, and they're all still there, but there's something different about the first one. They don't know where it is. And I was reading this when I went to the NASA website, because I wanted to find out what happened to Eagle. Where is it now? Can you go see it? No. You know, after it went back up and they reunited with Columbia, they just turned it loose. And it went into decaying orbit, science talk, and crashed on the surface of the moon. And so this is what I found at the NASA site, and this is the epigraph for the poem, which is called Eagle. Jettisoned from the command module on 21 July 1969 at 23:41 Universal Time, 7:41 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Impact site unknown. Something about that last sentence just got me. And I imagine that some future Robert Ballard is going to find it and send back images of it. And if I'm still alive, it will be an emotional moment for me. And imagine what it's going to look like. So anyway, Eagle hangs a tin can with legs above the moon's pallor, floats down like a feather to plant her feet in chalk. Out of her the first man walks, also the second, to hop about and speak brave words about first steps of men. She squats, remains womb, sanctuary, home, until it's time for their return to reunite with Columbia. Then her frail rockets fire just enough to lift them, leave that gleaming, desolate soil to which she, lone, abandoned, will fall back, crumpling, a heap of foil, cracked open like an egg. Yeah, we were also talking at dinner about, I have a lot of poems about my family, and they were asking about, you know, how do your family members feel about that? I don't really know so much, except I had an interesting thing. In Gravel and Hawk, I have a poem about my uncle, Jack, who died in a freak accident. You don't even want to know. You can read the poem. But I was worried that my aunt, his widow, would be upset by it. And so I sent her a copy of the book, and the next time I saw her, I was sort of, you know, a little nervous about this conversation, how it might go. And it turns out she was, in fact, pissed off about the poem. She said, "Why don't you have any poems about me? I'm your aunt." You know? So I thought that was really funny. And I haven't had anyone complain that I've written a poem about them. Only that they have, that if I haven't written a poem about them. So I had a lot of poems in the other book about my father, obviously. So here's one for Mom, again, who loves the cover. It's called Ronnie's. Dad dead, Mom back in the bank, tellering, Started dressing in cute skirts and pantsuits. She sewed herself from onion skin patterns and bright-colored knits picked up at Cloth World. Got her dark brunette hair cut in a shag. And she and her single girlfriends from work on a weekday night would lead me to Love American Style or Mary Tyler Moore and step out to hear the country house band or now and then headliners like Ray Price and Merle Haggard. Mom's blue Buick Wildcat, shoulder to shoulder with the other Detroit behemoths in the dim lot around back. Wind skittering trash along the street. Bass notes thumping through the sheet metal walls and the full swinging sound suddenly blaring when a couple came in or out the door. I know because I'm there now. Crouched behind the fender of a Skylark or Riviera, in the weird green glow of the rooftop Ronnie's sign, not keeping tabs on Mom, not watching out, just keeping time with the band and sipping a Slurpee while she dances through this 2-year window before getting rehitched, settling back down. Just 27, 28 years old, looking pretty and having the time of her life. Yeah, I became, for obvious reasons, what they used to refer to as a latchkey child. I don't think they use that term anymore. The idea is that there's no longer anyone to come home to for the kid after school. So they give them a latchkey, which I guess is a northern term. I think here in the South we just call it a key. But anyway, if you've ever seen Dial M for Murder with Grace Kelly, you guys know that one? The latchkey. If you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. Anyway, I became a latchkey child. And my mother, a very practical woman, grew up on a tenant cotton farm in East Texas. She just said, here's your key, go home after school, do your homework, don't get in trouble, I'll be home after work. Okay. And I didn't even think about it. You know, just never, it didn't seem like a big deal. And I didn't imagine what it was going to be like until the instant I turned the key and walked in the door. And then it was weird, you know, it's all mine. In the next few hours, you know. So what would you do in that moment? Raid refrigerator, right? Here's what I did. Remember the first time you let yourself in? Stunned by the sheer silence of it all. The sunlight blooming on mute, blanket-faced walls. And how you stormed them from room to room, blistering furniture and framed photographs with your hollering, commanding the sunlight to go away, because you wanted to be alone. Remember how you yelled yourself dizzy, exhilarated and scared, and how finally you dropped into your mother's chair and watched that same sunlight creep silently across floors, up walls, and let itself out. Yeah, I'm going to skip to some of the mill poems. Yeah, I started, studying about mills because I moved into the Eagle in Phoenix. By the way, it was the Eagle Mill, 1851, and federal troops burned it down a week after Appomattox in 1865, and they rebuilt it in the years after that and added the Phoenix part, the city rising from the ashes. That's how it became the biggest mill in the South at one point. It was a huge employer in the South, which was a pretty hard life for those people who worked there. It was pretty miserable, hot and dangerous, and you couldn't breathe, and there was all this lint you were breathing in, and they didn't make a lot of money, and if there was a downturn in the economy, they lost their jobs. I mean, it pretty much sucked, right? But people left the misery of the cotton farms for the misery of the cotton mills. That was the story. And the thing is that this whole thing we know of as our modern life, that is a result of the Industrial Revolution, that started, in northwest England, in a town called Manchester, with cotton mills. And the cotton, guess where it was grown? In the American South, right? By enslaved people on land stolen from the Native Americans. And then that moved across the sea to New England, to places like Lowell, Massachusetts, and then down the eastern seaboard, searching for that cheap labor. Places like Columbus, which they referred to at one point as the Lowell of the South. And now it's moved on to what they refer to as the global South. India, Mexico, Asia, right? And it just occurred to me, it's like a big tidal wave that comes through. High tide lifts all boats, they say, but it leaves all that wreckage in its wake, right? So, in doing that research and everything and thinking about it, I wrote this poem. It's called Clamor. The mill's non-stop noise, a whir and a clangor follows him home. Over the bridge and up the hill, while at his back it goes on wheezing, shuffling lint through manifold windows. Into the village with the lunch bucket knocking at his knee, to bounce a kid on his knee in the sunlit parlor of the four-room cottage identical to the one next door to the river that powers the turbines. The privy's sulphurous stench stretches to the porch, while his own open windows pass heat and flies and rugrats flap through the sprung screen door. A rung up from the tenant shack, maybe two from a hovel on the Rhine, a hut on the Liffey, the Mersey, the Volga. He is equal now to the terrace house bloke in Wigan, to his next century brother in Coimbatore, with one in a cinder-block flat in Nantong, perched above the Yangtze, whose mill tunes its waters daily to the color it's dying, red, blue, purple, through a little trapdoor. That last bit is from a friend of mine in Columbus. He grew up, he's in his 70s now, and he grew up when the mills were still running. He grew up in Phoenix City, Alabama, and he would walk across the bridge to go to the library of Columbus, because they don't have libraries in Alabama. They didn't then. And he said he would always stop on the bridge and look in the river, and you could tell what color they were dyeing, because that's the color that the river would be. Really good for your health, for sure. Alex mentioned a poem that I also want to read. In my my vinyl hounding, my hunting for records, I spent a lot of time in flea markets. And I was in one in Columbus one day with my girlfriend, and she, of course, was engaged in more noble pursuits. And she came over with this document, this pamphlet, about the size of a literary journal. And it looked kind of like one of those scholarly journals from the 50s or 60s, pale green cover, just print on the front. And it said, alphabetical list of the registered voters of the city of Columbus, Georgia, 1934. And they had about 5 of them. I chose 1934 because it was a strike year. Mill workers struck all over the country, including in Columbus, and some of them were killed, which was put down brutally by the mill owners. And I mean, we all know the history of the South. But to see this document, it was just stunning. Just to lay it out there in plain language like it does. And so, anyway, that's the source of this poem. It's called The Names. Again, the epigraph for the poem is the title of the pamphlet itself. Alphabetical list of the registered voters of the city of Columbus, Georgia, 1934. Heading on the first page, white men. Proceeding thus. Abbott, Ackerman, Adair, etc. for 51 2/3 pages. Occupation, conductor, bookkeeper, carpenter, salesman, clerk, mechanic. Then, for just over 2 pages, colored men. Janitor, porter, minister, drayman, butler, driver, laborer, custodian, teacher. Next, white women, running some 21 pages. Names, ages, addresses, none for the listed vocation. Last, colored women. 10 names, all told. Ella Brewer, Addie Giddens, Charlotte Hammonds, Tina Hines, Julia Jarrett, Laura Johnson, Molly Rogers, Henrietta Shepherd, Maddie Spencer, Betty Williams. A simple ledger, duly certified by M.M. Affleck, Clay E. Taylor, and Milton Baum, registrars, as being true and correct. All right, just one or two more here. I'm a bicycle commuter, and because you ride a bicycle, you often go through, you take routes you wouldn't normally take if you were driving a car, because you're trying not to get killed. I mean, that is run over by cars. Yeah. So it leads you to some places that you wouldn't otherwise see. It's another great thing about riding a bicycle. So this is a poem that came out of that experience. It's called 3 Palm Trees on Railroad Street. Idle under overpasses, Railroad Street runs east and west a quarter-mile between lonely stretches of 2nd and 3rd Avenues, separating 2 possible, if not likely, crack houses from the burned-out husk of Julius Friedlander's wholesale warehouse. The faded sign painted on its red brick walls still advertising jute bagging and cotton waste 100 years late. But between the railroad and street after which it's named, on a strand of grassless right-of-way, these 3 old sailors of the South Seas, raggedy, rail-thin, mop-topped bean poles bending at the waist as if stooped by age or rum, stand in a spaced-out row a couple 100 miles from Florida. Paradise untended, I guess, as I'm about to pass on my bike, for upwards of 40 years. They bring me to a halt. There's no one around, and what's around could not be sadder. A house whose front door is a blanket, a trash-strewn gutter, a Dodge on blocks. Then these fellows, their fronds sooty, graying, and yet bringing me such dingy, delicious, unexpected joy. I have stopped to stare and forget about where I am, and consider instead how, however they came to be, 3 of anything make a row, and how what survives may bless by simply being here. All right, I'm going to read one more. And you mentioned already this Christmas in Columbus, Georgia. I thought I'd read a different one. This is one about my daughter. I had this, I began with a poem about my son, so I'll end with a poem about my daughter, which I found was a lot more difficult to write. I've written several poems about my son, and I've written several poems about my daughter, but I can't publish most of them. They're a little too sentimental. So, anyway, here's one from my daughter, Natalie, based on an experience we had together. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again for having me, and thanks for the introduction. It's great. This is in a deer stand with my daughter. Because she's 19, and because she wants this blood, though she cannot tell me why. I'm here to do what I can. We watch a doe edge across a clearing toward this oak our seat on stilts is propped against. 50 yards off and unaware of us, the 308 across our laps. We stay still as assassins. Natalie hoping a big buck is soon to follow. She is so delicate in her movements and careful watchfulness. The flickering of ears and tail, the woods so quiet. We're startled by the sudden rapping of a woodpecker. A barred owl's grunting echoes through the forest. A crow caws like a circus barker, again, and flies off. I lift my binoculars, and lo, there he is at wood's edge, melted into reality. His modest rack like a small castle balanced atop his head. Nat eyes him through her rifle scope, but it's growing darker. She's in a race against time, busy willing the buck to move about half again this close, commit the last mistake he'll ever make, so we can walk home on his musk, cut his handsome shape into food. Remember this day till we die. And darkness is inevitable. The luck of having such a daughter, some few late fall afternoons to spend, things no one can count on. It's in that reverie I'm lost when she ejects with a loud ratcha the round from her chamber, sends both fear bounding and all of us unharmed into the dusk. Thank you.